Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. Let's give ourselves maybe about 10-15 seconds for the rest to come online and we will get started. Okay, let me get started. Yeah, hello everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's APAC-Med webinar. My name is Gabriel. I'm the Partnership Director at APAC-Med. As a brief introduction, APAC-Med is a non-profit medical technology association representing companies operating in the medical device, diagnostics, and digital health space. As an industry association, we lead efforts to advance medical technology in order to raise the standards of care for patients. Today, we would like to do a deep dive into the future of robotics in healthcare. Robotic-assisted interventions offer great procedural precision and standardization and protection from radiation hazards in a cath lab. There is also the potential of performing robotic-assisted interventions remotely in the future. When combined with advanced image guidance and supported by high-speed communication technology, remote robotics can truly democratize healthcare and expand access to healthcare to more patients where they need it and when they need it. Moderating today's dialogue is Dr. Adam Chi, who currently serves as Chief Smart Health Leadership Center at the Institute of System Science at the National University of Singapore. He leads the Smart Health Leadership Center in transforming the future experience of health through technology, data, innovation, and design, delivering impact through provision of practice-oriented education, mentorship-based consulting, and industry-based applied research services. Dr. Chi brings more than 20 years of health informatics, digital health, innovation technologies, and business experience. I'll leave it to Dr. Chi to introduce our panelists for today. Dr. Paul Ong, Senior Interventional Cardiologist at Mount Elizabeth Novena Hospital, and Rajat, Head of Asia Pacific at Corindus, a Siemens Healthineers company. Dr. Chi is all yours.
Right, thank you, Gabriel. So a very good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As mentioned by Gabriel, my name is Adam, and he has done a very nice introduction of myself. Thank you so much. So as you can see on the screen, as well as mentioned by Gabriel, I have with me today Mr. Rajat Nag, Head of Asia Pacific, Corindus Vascular Robotics at Siemens Healthineers, as well as Dr. Paul Ong, Senior Interventional Cardiologist at Mount Elizabeth Novena Hospital. Now, the panelists' impressive profiles are available at the event's website, so I'm not going to repeat it in full, or else I'll take another 20 minutes just to fully and properly introduce them. For the panel discussion today, or rather for the webinar today, we're going to start off with each of the panelists giving a 10 minutes presentation regarding the topic, future of robotics. Before we proceed into the actual panel discussions. We will also be taking questions from the audience. So, please feel free to put your questions in the message box. I will create them and we will try to address them after the panelists have given their presentation. So without further ado, I'd like to invite the first panelist, Rajat, to deliver his presentation. Rajat, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Adam Chi. I'll just share my screen. Give me a minute. Please let me know if you're able to see my screen.
Yep.
Excellent. Good morning, everyone. And thank you for joining us in this webinar of Future of Robotics in Healthcare. I'm very privileged to be able to speak on this topic because this is a topic which is very dear to me as well as, my line of business. So when we talk about the future, we need to understand where we are coming from. So we'll take a start from the past. The dream of robotics assisting doctors and revolutionizing medicine is not new. On the contrary, it goes back, many, many years back. The first robots found applications in assisting doctors, Mademoiselle Claire, an automated nurse who would hand surgical instruments to doctors. By 1950, Lumena, a transparent talking robot, was created to teach med students about female anatomy. It had 11 kilometers of cabling for detailed depiction of veins, nerves, and organs. The first Android robot, SIM-1, was invented in 1967, this time a male robot, for training anesthetists. It could blink, breathe, had a ticking heart, it could swallow, and respond to medication. And if the doctor made a mistake, it died. So as you can see, the early applications were mostly for educational use. We fast forward to current times, and we look at, some of the robots which was developed in the last, let's say, 10 to 15 years. These robots are medical support systems. They take the pressure off the doctors, but do not replace them. You can see that they are mostly automation robots, often best deployed for repetitive routine tasks like drug dispensing in pharmacies, blood tests in labs, or assisting nurses in doing the patient rounds. They still find some educational use. For instance, if you look at in South Korea, where the birth rate is so low that midwives use a training robot to practice delivering a baby safely. In orthopedics, exoskeletons are used to get people back on their feet. But the first surgical robot was actually introduced towards the end of 1990. And today, surgeons sit away from the patient bedside, away from radiation on a console where they're able to see a very high resolution 3D view, are able to see 10 times magnified image of the vessels and the organs inside, and operate with 7 degrees of freedom, not even possible with sometimes with human hands. And on the right-hand side, you see the endovascular robotics, where again, the physician is shielded away from radiation, is operating the robot from a distance, and is able to utilize the precision and the accuracy of a robot to place stents and balloons accurately. And what do we see in the COVID times, the application of robots? COVID has accelerated the adoption of technology, as we have seen, particularly technologies which helps to create distance between healthcare workers and protect our frontline healthcare staff during these pandemic times. Here you see a few examples where robots have proven quite useful during COVID times, doing infection detection in public places, to delivery of food in quarantine centers, to assisting nurses in managing patients in hospital settings. You may know that Grace, a humanoid nurse, successor of Sophia, of those who have actually followed the Android robot, is busy doing the rounds in hospitals in Hong Kong, attending to patients, while the furry seal robot, Paru, provide companion care in Japan elderly care centers. So what does the future look like in terms of medical robotics and AI? We are very encouraged to see the investments going into this space, and particularly the market of medical robotics expected to grow at a 16.6% compounded annual growth rate to reach $27 billion by 2027, and the opportunities it will bring along. So if we may now take a peek into the future, we want to see how robotics and AI will play a key role in augmenting human intelligence and improving quality of life. Imagine when losing a limb may no longer be limiting, but may be deemed as an enhanced capability with bionic prosthetics that are mind controlled. Not too far in the future, we could turn disabilities into super abilities. Elon Musk's Neuralink is all geared to connect the human brain to the computer, which again opens up unimaginable possibilities. For example, it can help overcome disabilities and injuries, restore motor and brain function lost due to a stroke or accident, or even help humans compete with the increasingly intelligent artificial intelligence. Fast forward, also in the telesurgery or the remote surgery space, I want to take you a bit to the back and let it was actually issues far away from Earth. As soon as people began to truly consider human spaceflight, they started to consider how they would treat a human thousands of miles away from any doctor. In the 1970s, NASA suggested that researchers look into the option of remote controlled robots to operate on astronauts. So it was in 2001, the first transatlantic operation was conducted by surgeons in New York on a patient in France. Remote robotic surgery and interventions can expand telehealth for procedural treatment instead of just consultation and diagnosis as we see mostly today. This can truly democratize healthcare delivery and bring expert healthcare to patients when they need it and where they need it. While many of these technologies are still works in the labs, I will pick up one area where we are actually investing in image-guided AI driving robotics and take you a bit deeper into this. And when we talk about image-guided robotics, we are talking about tackling challenges of increasing access to care, dealing with procedural complexity, increasing efficiency of labs, and and protecting patients and physicians from the hazardous environment of radiation. Today, Corinda's endovascular robotics today provides solutions which already addresses some of these pillars of concern. The first one being protection. The Corinda's robotics system is able to provide 95% radiation protection to the primary operator, the physician, and almost 20% to the patient. In terms of precision, the Corinda's robot is able to place balloons and stands within move the balloons and stands within sub-millimeter and place them within 1 millimeter accuracy. And the automation that we have in the system today already helps to take the expert interventional skills and use them as algorithms for any operator to use them when they call upon those particular automation skills to be deployed. So today, the system is already proving better patient outcomes with almost 10,000 procedures completed and almost 80 clinical publications supporting the evidence-backed medicine that we are providing. Now, why are we combining imaging and robotics at Siemens Siemens Healthineers? We want to address the number 1 and number 2 global killers, which is ischemic stroke as well as coronary artery disease. And we believe time to care or time to treatment is critical for both of these 2 global killers. You know that we say in stroke, time is brain. For every 1.5 hours of delayed treatment, the patient may lose 1 complete year of disable-free life. So those are the challenges that we are excited to address, and we are designing our solutions to be able to address that. So our image-guided endovascular robotics will address 3 different areas with remote robotics, image and robotic technology integration, and specialized capabilities, which we will talk in detail. In the remote robotic space, we want to improve access to patient care. We want to improve more patient volume, and we want to reduce the time to the care. So if you look today, the standard of care for coronary artery disease and ischemic stroke has already been established. The protocols are there. The challenge is that access to that highly trained specialist who perform these procedures is limited and a significant global problem. Remote robotics will help create a mesh network where theoretically any hospital with internet access can be connected. And that means that smaller hospitals may receive the benefit of working with multiple specialties on demand. Remote robotic-assisted intervention could be the first opportunity, as I said, to use telehealth for treatment rather than for just diagnosis and consultation. On the image and robotic technology integration part, we are excited about 2 main areas. One is the ability to improve automation that we are already providing, and the other is then increased use of AI to leverage what we have learned. Today, we are already using automation in robotics. These targeted automations use algorithms to replicate manual techniques of some of the best interventionalists in the world. And they have the potential to speed up procedures. But what happens when you take it to the next level? One opportunity that we are investing is the ability to leverage insights from fluoroscopic imaging to autonomously drive the devices using our robotic technology to anatomy that otherwise may be very time-consuming or difficult to reach. By using multimodality imaging and algorithms combined with precision robotic control, we hope to further the possibility of improving patient outcomes. And this is the autonomous navigation I was telling you about, where the fluoroscopic imaging will be driving the robot and the device to the targeted lesion and the blockages without the physician having to actually manually drive the robot through the joysticks. And then add on to this the element of AI. The AI's potential in healthcare, as we know, to improve workflow and patient outcomes is extraordinary. We could leverage machine learning algorithms derived from large population data sets to enable an integrated image-guided robotic system to deliver peri-procedural treatment plans that may further improve patient safety and outcomes. And finally, on the specialized capabilities, we want to standardize care. We want to further improve digitalization and put physicians and patients out of the harm's way of radiation. So in summary, how does a roadmap look like? We have image-guided robotics that are already available today for the following interventions: for coronary interventions, neurovascular, treating neurovascular aneurysms, as well as peripheral interventions. We do have the vision to improve access to timely care for stroke patients, as well as to provide clinicians access to the most advanced therapies for coronary artery disease. So in summary, what we are developing our systems is to deal with some of the key challenges that we see in the world by the use of endovascular robotics and image-guided endovascular robotics. First, we want to improve timely access to care by remote robotics. Second, we want to tackle the procedural complexity by providing smart automation tools. And finally, we want to provide access to expert care using image-guided endovascular robotics. With that, thank you for your attention, and I'll give it back to Dr. Adam Chi to take us further.
Thanks, Rajan. That was very informative, and in my personal opinion, really sets the pace for the discussion later on. I'm going to proceed next to invite Dr. Paul to deliver his presentation. Paul, over to you.
Thank you very much, Adam, and fantastic talk, Rajat, as always. Okay, let me see if I can get my slide going. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit more concretely. Rajat very nicely set the scene of what robotic can do, and I'm going to give you some examples and actually drill into the cardiology field, in the heart field a little bit more. Okay, so robotic angioplasty is not really something really remote. It's already happening. It's already happening in Singapore. We are one of the first countries in Southeast Asia to perform robotic-assisted angioplasty in Singapore. And this is gradually also happening in places like Japan, in Hong Kong, and also in India. Okay, so I will start with an example. This is a 55-year-old lady with a background of high blood pressure and cholesterol. So she came into hospital as an emergency with a heart attack. This is her heart arteries. Okay, for those of you who are not too familiar with it, we would normally bring the patient into the X-ray room. Under X-ray guiding, we will take a picture of the heart arteries. So you can see here, this black arteries, because we inject X-ray contrast to show up the artery, you can see the narrowing here, which is highlighted by the yellow arrow. And you can see how narrow this artery is right in the middle. So this is a key blood vessels. This is almost like the PIE for Singapore. So any blockage here results in a massive heart attack. So this is what's happening in the X-ray room. Fellow inside the control room, he just put the devices onto the robot, a robotic arm, okay, which is connected to the patient. Now, here is where I am sitting outside of the X-ray room. Okay, you can see that I am not very COVID mask even. So you can see that I'm using the joystick here, manipulating this wire. Can you see this fine wire snaking down? So this wire is going to go down this blocked coronary artery. You can see the roadmap here. So it's following the line of the artery that it is going down the right place. So I can use the robot and manipulate this wire down very smoothly. And you can see that I'm on the third joystick. Dots. Okay, the balloon is now advancing. That's rich. Very nice job. Okay, so I have 3 joysticks that allow me to control various parts of the wire into the balloon. So at this point, I will inflate the balloon. It's a little bit like a sausage. You see that being inflated. So this is what it looks like once it's inflated. So the artery where it was narrow now stretched. Now the tip stretched. You see that the narrow is gone. Very good progress. And I'm going to show you Rajat early on mentioned about using the robot very precise. So we're going to do some measurement. We know there's a blockage. I need to know how long that narrow is. I can put that right nice standing. So you can't hear me. I put the balloon where I think narrowing is. I reset this to 0. And as I put,
are they bringing that lady of mine?
Pulling until I think
patient of mine with the
where I want to be.
is it?
And therefore I can measure in terms of millimeters how far I put back.
Sure. You're the in charge.
Very precise.
There's some patient that.
So this is what happened. I placed the stent inside. And after placing the stent inside, I want to make the stent expand a bit better. So I now can use the robot to push another balloon inside the stent and inflate the stent even better. And this is what the final result looks like. You saw this narrowing before, and after placing the stent in, you see this area is now wide open. So we're successfully using a robot assistant to actually clear the blocked artery. So now that you have some idea what it looks like, I want to sort of, bring back to what the previous speakers mentioned about the current state and where's our future state. So currently, when I'm performing angioplasty, most of the operating rooms or across Southeast Asia, I look at the angiogram. I think I train my trainees, and some of them go through the sort of usual mentorship and proctorship, where they will go through a bit of trial and error to learn how to move the wire. In most places, you look at the narrowing and think, well, this narrowing is probably 2.5 millimeter in diameter, or sometimes you look at it and you think this is more like 3 mm in diameter. But a lot of eyeballing. So in experienced operator, probably pretty good. But in the less experienced operator, sometimes you can make mistake. And there are a lot of manual adjustments and all that. But you see, in the future state, it's different. Using robotic, you sit a lot closer to the screen. You saw when I was operating, my big TV screen is right in front of me. I can see very clearly. I can use robotic to actually measure what's inside the vessel in terms of millimeter at a time. And the chance of placing the balloon and the stent in exactly the right place and not missing and the narrowing it really is very, very easy to do. Okay. So what else are there? When we're talking about technology these days, you cannot really avoid the topic like artificial intelligence, auto navigations, and remote capabilities. So let's have a look at the where artificial intelligence can come in.
Can you fly that thing?
Not yet.
Favorite movie.
Operator.
Tank, I need a pilot program for a B-212 helicopter.
He doesn't know how to fly a helicopter.
Hurry.
So she dialed up Central. Okay. So the program is uploaded to her.
Let's go.
Let's go. So suddenly she knows how to fly the helicopters. Now, is that a million miles away from what we're doing now? We can now create algorithms based on the skill set of operators. So maybe my technique, my Port-Ong's technique of manipulating the wire or pushing the balloon can be exactly replicated by the AI. And if my fellows in hospital wants to do it, he can flick a switch and put on the Port-Ong program. Okay, but equally, you can have great operators who are based in Japan, in Europe, America, and certain part of the procedure, you can actually borrow those techniques and push it in. Let's give you an example. Okay, I'm going to play this. This is animation. So the example here, we try to push a wire to the block. Wire will be low. Now, maybe we sometimes have difficulty pushing this narrowing. Okay, so you can see that here. They already fitted in Singapore, and some of my colleagues in the practice. We talk a little bit about remote angioplasty. This is a proof of concept, actually happened in all places in India, okay? But bear in mind, India, you know, certain places does a very, very good infrastructure. So the patients are operating in, the patients staying in the operating room in the hospital, but the operators, the surgeons, are actually 30 kilometers away in the temple. So they set up the console in the temple where the senior operators are able to perform the procedure 30 kilometers away. And they didn't just do one case. That one day, they did about 4 or 5 cases successfully. So this proved that this can happen. And it didn't happen, you know, yesterday. It happened in December 2018. So can you imagine now with 5G technology, with the signal being so much faster, the distance now potentially can be negated. You can just imagine you can actually sit at home and do the procedure on a patient in the hospital, or you can sit in a major hospital in Singapore and operating a patient somewhere sitting in a remote village in Indonesia. The remote capability is also significant in one other field. I'm talking about heart attack, treating heart disease. But you know, early on when we mentioned about stroke attack is actually also a very big burden to the healthcare system. And a lot of patients are not getting it because simply not enough doctors are available to treat them. And the windows of treating brain attack or stroke is actually even narrower. The patient ideally should be within the hospital within 6 hours. So maybe less of a problem in Singapore because you know, a small country with good infrastructure. But can you imagine in a country like Malaysia or Philippines, where patient may be in a remote island, just getting the patient to the hospital is already taking up a lot of time. But with remote access, this sometimes is the difference between not getting any treatment and getting a very good treatment. So remote capability to deliver healthcare in vast areas is actually very attractive. And this doesn't just apply to Southeast Asia. You can easily imagine in countries like Australia or even America, where the landscape is much larger. So if in the middle of a snowstorm, to try and helicopter a patient from a district general hospital to the main center sometimes may not be even possible. I got asked some questions very often, okay, and I'm very happy to open the discussion to all of you later on. So usually, what's the benefit using a robotic system to the patients, to the doctors, and also to the hospitals? Okay, let's look at, you know, how can it benefit the patient first? Well, healthcare practitioners and healthcare companies usually define safety and efficacy from the patient's perspective. We want things to be better, cheaper, safer, faster, and more comfortable. Sometimes these things can be a little bit more difficult to justify in robotic side, but let me share with you. First of all, you can be very precise in terms of doing the procedures. I think especially in heart disease, coronary arteries, where you are really literally measuring in terms of millimeters, such precision makes a difference. I already touched on remote access, okay? And in some places, the difference is really between having a treatment and not having a treatment if you don't have remote access. And then there is possibility of cross-site operations, especially in the time of COVID. Let me hold that thought and I'll come back to that later on in the talk. How about the benefit of robotic-assisted system to the physician? Here, this is, I feel very, very personal here. As the doctors, and I've been practicing angioplasty for over 20 years, the radiation dose, the X-ray dose to me, potentially is pretty nasty. And actually able to operate away from the X-ray room actually may prolong my practicing life. I put a picture up of this mannequin wearing this lead apron. This is 7 kilometers in weight. And when I'm operating, and in long cases, especially sometimes I have to wear this and stand upright for about 2 to 3 hours at a time in the tough cases. After days and days, weeks and weeks, and months and years, almost all the good operators that I know of have back pain, chronic back pain, knee pain because of that. Our eyesight, of course, radiation and can actually make cataracts happen a lot more earlier than planned. And then finally, I recently had a phone call from my trainee, who is now a consultant. She's very happy to share with me that she's now expecting her a third baby. I'm very pleased for her. But she also shared with me her concern that she will have to step away from practicing in the cath lab and not able to operate on the patients because of radiation. And she felt very guilty that her other colleagues will have to do extra shifts and put in extra work to take over her slots that she have to vacate for the next 9 months or so. With robotic, this solves a lot of problems. And this is genuine. This is a real problem because in the medical school and in the cardiology field, increasingly, we are seeing more and more very, very good female trainees and consulting colleagues coming in, and they're fantastic. But they also want to have the balance of work and life. They want to have a family, and this type of radiation environment is not favorable. But with robotic remote capabilities, it is now a reality. And this is not just doctors. We also have nurses and other cardiac healthcare alliance who are at a young age that they want to have a family. So cutting out radiation, reducing it significantly is a huge field. And also in the COVID world, we are talking about remote working. A lot of you have been asked to work from home. Robotic and drones are actually obviously a very topical trend and will probably happen and get accelerated because of the pandemic. How does it work in a robotic angioplasty setting to treating heart patients? Well, first of all, fewer staff need to be exposed to patients who are potentially carrying infectious risk, high infectious risk. And also you don't transfer the patient between hospitals. Again, that lower the risk of spreading the disease to different healthcare institutions. This is an example that I use. It's actually done in America when COVID was really bad over there. You can see that the surgeon is operating in a separate room. The patient is in the X-ray room with a big red circle drawn around with the center around the head. So this is a 4-meter diameter circle. So 2 meters is safety distance. We do keep our distance, social distancing, okay, medical distance. So one staff only inside who walk to the patient to mount the device, and then they walk away, step away. So everyone else is outside the radiation X-ray room and performing the procedures. So you see that this is meaning that the people actually involved and have contact with the patient is minimized. So then I want you to stretch it even further to think about a situation like I can have a patient in NCID who unfortunately have COVID, and unfortunately because of that also have heart problems. And now, if robotic assisted procedure is available, the patient can be operated in NCID. The cardiologist can be sitting in potentially in tentoxing or in NUH, operating the machines and treating that patient. I don't have to send the entire team, nurses and doctors over there. I just need one staff staying in NCID to mount the devices. The rest of the caring team can be outside. So you don't move that patient from NCID out and risk spreading it, and you don't move a lot of medical team into the NCID and cross-contaminate the sites. Then finally, what's it for the hospital? Well, I already mentioned about infection control, but also no doubt there is this halo effect in terms of this hospital, we have the state-of-the-art technology, we have robotic-assisted BCI. So for hospitals that have a very technology theme to it, it obviously is helpful. And I also mentioned that cross-site angioplasty, meaning if there's a group hospitals, maybe the main primary hospital can be in Jakarta, but they can have his daughter hospital dotted in Bandung, in other places in Indonesia, where the patient can be operated in the daughter site, but the specialist can stay in the main site in Jakarta. So these are possibilities with remote angioplasty and cross-site PCI. That's come to the end of my topic. Some of you may want to have some slides. Please scan the QR code. We all scan QR code these days, and I'm happy to discuss with you and then send the PowerPoint to you if that's what you want. Okay, Adam, I'm going to hand it back to you. I'm happy to take discussions further.
Right. Thanks, Paul. That was definitely a very fruitful and interesting presentation. The only slight problem is sometimes when the videos are playing, it overrides your verbal speech. So that's slight imperfection, but overall, definitely fantastic. So we have heard from both panelists, Rajat and Paul's presentation, and we have seen from the presentation as well as, we can always apply them in context to our daily life for those of us working in a clinical care environment, that some of the current state of technology and even perceived future state of technology, which includes the adoption of artificial intelligence and analytics. Case in point here is utilizing data, which is medical imaging, for augmentation, clinical decision support, and to a slight hint as well, even training physicians in their work. These are actually no longer futuristic stuff. These are in practice. It's here already. In fact, it's here yesterday. A lot of us are sometimes thinking that these are the future trends, but it's actually really, in reality, applied science already. So with this context in mind, perhaps we can talk a little bit about the implications that comes with such adoption, because we have many hospitals out there who have still not adopted similar technologies, who may be considering. So I'd like to throw the question out to Rajat and Paul. So what sort of implications can one foresee in terms of workflow when you adopt such technologies? Paul, would you like to start?
I would let
Rajat, would
Dr.
you
Paul
start? Yeah, okay.
take the lead, because he's the user. He can give the best feedback, and I will add on anything from my observation after that.
Okay, so I go first. Okay, I think a lot of issue here is in adopting technology is that you have to prove that this is of value to your patients and to your practitioner, the doctors, and of course to the hospital, which is largely investing in the technology. I can mainly focus on the physician point of view, how this potentially can be very important, very useful. And the COVID situation really exacerbated some of these, highlighted some of these features. I think the ability to be able to train how to do this, and therefore not keeping a little bit of a gap between you and the patients is really very beneficial. But in terms of training, it's a very different type of training here, and it's not true that I don't think it's actually going to happen immediately that the robot will replace my job and I'll become jobless. I just don't think it will happen that way. Because to operate on a robot, you actually need a lot of experience. It's a different type of experience, but the foundation is still based on the years of practice that you have in order to slickly pick up this technology and do a good job. But it also means that the training is really, really important for the next generation of physicians coming into the field. I just do not think robotic is going to go away. Maybe Rajat might disagree, but maybe not in this current form in Corindus, but in some way it will happen, and it will increasingly be adopted into modern technology. So for the trainees these days coming in, it is inevitable that you need to be involved in this kind of training. And also, not long ago, I was traveling all over Southeast Asia, doing cases, going to other places, mentoring some of my trainees, or being invited to demonstrate certain skill and techniques. That's all stopped. Okay, and I also know that KOLs in Indonesia who move around in Jakarta, or move around in all over the country to do complex cases, all those have stopped. So I think these type of procedures, increasingly we will see robotic coming in, and then also demonstrate or remote capability, demonstrating how to train people is going to be very, very key.
Before Raja continue, just let me touch on, actually, Paul, your answer just addressed one of the questions that was posed by the audience in terms of the pending adoption and whether, how it will affect clinical workflow, which I think is very apt. So to write on, also something that Raja could perhaps help answer. So also from the audience, there are questions pertaining to, we all know this is great and good, but obviously they'll come to issue of who pays for it. That is the case for emerging technologies all the time. Before you actually able to articulate the value to your stakeholders. So Paul has articulated these particular aspects in terms of clinical value. So maybe Raja, you can help address this in terms of how would you go around convincing stakeholders to make the plunge.
Yeah, I think it's a topic which often comes up, and thanks for bringing this up. It's a very valid concern, right? And particularly we have to look at the kind of hospital payment plans that we have depending on different countries. In countries which are mostly driven by private insurance payments, right? People pay it out of their own pockets. I think the challenge is, I would say, a relatively lesser one, because people who want to go for let's say a safer treatment, a treatment which exposes them to lesser radiation, places that stent more accurately so that they have less adverse outcomes, and almost a same procedural time. In those countries, I think we have a solution, because people who are going for some of these complex treatments, whether they are using intravascular ultrasound, or they're using OCT technologies or rotabulator technologies, they're already paying for that extra efficacy or extra sophistication in that procedural treatment. So those countries will be well addressed already, because it's private insurance payments. This I'm only talking about the high cost of payment initially that the patient has to bear. But if you look at reimbursement-based countries, it takes a little while, but I think eventually most governments, most healthcare institutions would actually want to bring down their cost of operation, right? Their cost of healthcare, and eventually in the longer term it will, because the procedural automation helps to navigate complex vessels much faster than it would otherwise. We are doing studies to establish that as well. We are working with the most government agencies where reimbursement is the key for medical payments to make that happen. And we are working with those agencies to see what will actually help them qualify that into the medical reimbursement plan, so that patients don't have to bear that burden. So we are addressing that from the regulation side, from the patient side, and from the hospital side, also reducing procedural time in terms of workflow efficiency and smart automation. We haven't even touched the topic about access to care, or as I would say, access to timely expert care. Because today you have a lot of hospitals, let's say in Indonesia, where we have 10,000 islands, right? How do you provide expert coronary interventions today? It's impossible. People have to come down to main cities, right? And by that time they come, either they may be waitlisted for so long that their quality of life gets impaired by the time they get the treatment, whether it's a stroke or a coronary artery disease. And this technology allows you to have that reach out to those patients where they are when they need it. And that is something I think the governments will also consider, which will also help in that entire reimbursement process going forward. So we see it at multiple ways of approaching this. It is still in its early stages, but I think the promises that we see from the users who are working with this innovative technology, we see great potential. And Dr. Polong is one of our pioneer early users. He has written extensively on this topic and published also in European journals. So I think we are very excited about where this technology leads us to.
I understand Paul has a question.
Maybe Adam and Rajat, maybe I can follow up a little bit from the doctor's perspective. I show you the example where I was placing a stent in that left coronary artery right at the beginning of the talk. And that's a relatively straightforward narrowing. But sometimes when you come to doing procedure which is a little bit more complex, or the blockage is a little bit more extensive, I need to put longer stents or sometimes even 2 stents. This is where the cost will come back in, and I want to address that a little bit. From the physician point of view, the stents that I use are fixed in length, okay? They come in certain length like 18 mm, 22 millimeter, 48 millimeter. When they're not long enough, then sometimes you need to put 2. Because if you are eyeballing it and measuring it, a lot of times it's based on experience. And sometimes we rather put some which is slightly longer, because what you don't want is you miss out. Or if you think it's too long, and you might have to take 2 stents to complete it. But with robotic, you can actually be pretty precise, and often you can measure it and actually choose one stance to do the whole job. So the extra cost of the robotic, which was mentioned, is roughly the cost of one extra stent. So if you compare it that way, the cost sometimes, in some cases, can be cost neutral. And that's not taking into account of a better outcome. If you didn't miss, or you didn't have to be forced to put two stents in and can get away with just doing one slightly longer stent, the outcome probably is going to be better as well. So I think that's something maybe I can just chip in on top of what Rajat has mentioned.
Thank you.
If I would just add on, because of some of the audience may not have experience with angioplasty or stents, a lot of times when physicians actually perform these procedures, you guys will try open up multiple stents at times, right? Just after eyeballing, you're trying, oh, these stents are very expensive. And once you open it, that's it. Someone has to pay for that. So that's something a lot of people actually escapes them. So, oh, just a very tiny medical consumable. How expensive can this thing be? It's very expensive. So this is where Paul's point comes in. You know, you actually, from that, if you have clinical experience, or if you've seen, witness physicians actually performing such interventions, you know that it's actually very, very relevant. This actually saves a lot of cost. And you might think about, you know, someone will pay for it. It could be a public healthcare institution. That money comes back to taxpayer. A lot of people don't realize that, you know, so actually eventually someone will pay for it. So just to touch on Paul's, because from a physician's point of view, he's more concerned about clinical care, you know, let people like us concerned about money. We're the bad guys. So just to actually also touch on Rajat's point, he's actually made a very interesting point. So he used Indonesia as an example, where geographical distance actually translate to a huge difference in terms of clinical care outcomes, because the ability to actually receive care, timely care, as he has mentioned, is crucial. Okay, especially as mentioned earlier on by Paul, for stroke-related patients, this is literally not a joke. The faster you actually get an intervention, the more effective your recovery and rehab will be. So it's not a matter of, you know, you're putting up, you know, yes, I managed to perform an intervention and then I put in the same amount of rehab. It doesn't really work that way, you know, so you'll be additional costs wasted that. And this applies, even though Raja only mentioned Indonesia, if you look at the Asia perspective of things, which, by the way, we are the most populous region in the world, so we should be the majority. You look at Thailand, you look at Philippines, the problem actually escalates well beyond one geographical region. Of course, I would like to say China as well, but China is an interesting set of culture as well. So with that in mind, you know, if I were to sum up the key points, we've talked about utilizing robotics with AI, emerging technologies, analytics, coupling with medical imaging for clinical decision support, and it actually cuts across the continuum of care from the patient's perspective. A lot of times we talk about continuum of care from the provider perspective. In this case, it really touches on the patient's perspective. Now, in terms of that, and we expand it further with the introduction of 5G technology, what sort of barriers can we foresee from the regulatory front, and extending from that, pushback from the hospital front? Because now Paul has actually gave some very good examples where you have clusters hospital, where the main hospital could actually have the capability and you do remote intervention. But how about cross-country interventions? So what do you guys think? Paul, you have some experience in this area. You mentioned you go to Indonesia, so perhaps you'd like to start?
I think medicine is a very regulated field. So while it's usually not very different from doing a procedure on a Chinese or Malay or Caucasian, the anatomy is by and large similar. The medical regulatory is very, very different. So I need a license to practice in Singapore. I certainly need a license or temporary license to practice in the Philippines or in Hong Kong. So when you come to cross-border, you will open up a slightly different medical legal issues. So if I operate in Singapore on a patient who is in Batam, so who is ultimately medical legally responsible for the patient in that sense? So these are things that I think will need to be ironed out. But I think no different from if your EV is automated and the car is self-driving and something happened, who is going to be responsible? Is it the driver or is it the car company? So these are topics that no doubt will become important discussion points. My take is if this, and I haven't done this remotely yet, but if this were to happen, most likely will be a physicians who will be taking overall responsibility on site in that particular country. And I will more be like a proctor operating from overseas. So that might be one of the solutions. And this happened quite often in other parts of the world too. But another situation is I probably would need to be granted practicing privilege for that one day by that particular hospital or by the local health authority to actually operate on the patient. The difference is I don't have to fly out. I probably stay in my hospital to do it. But those are genuine points and will need discussion.
And I can add to that, Adam. Dr. Paul Long has very kind of nicely summarized the regulatory challenges regarding patient responsibility and treatment outcomes. What I can talk to a little bit is just to complete the scenarios about the technology side of things, right? So the technology is there today, right? Today, we are actually basing this technology. I will only talk about our technology within Siemens Healthineers, which we are kind of developing. So this technology today is based on a dedicated network infrastructure where we expect to have less than 50 milliseconds of latency. Can you imagine what is 50 milliseconds? The human eye cannot detect the latency beyond 100 milliseconds, less than 100 milliseconds. So we are talking even less than that, right? And 5G and other technologies which are being deployed, we will be testing them as well. We wanted to first ensure that the dedicated infrastructure is able to support that, and we are working in those lines. And of course, we will move forward with the technology advancements to make things happen, because I think 5G has great promises, right? And you see what's happening in China with 5G technology, also in the medical field, is amazing, right? High resolution images are kind of ported to the main hospital while the patient is being brought in an ambulance far away a few kilometers, right? So people are already preparing for that. So I think those things are already taking shape. So we will see technology driving robotics adoption even faster than we imagine today.
Thanks for adding to that. Yeah, I totally agree with you. And some of the questions that's coming from the audience, goes around the theme of, yeah, we know this is great. Of course, cost is concerned, and we have to sort of talk about it. So actually, the way, if I were to put it, is putting CapEx, OpEx in a patient's lifetime expenses as opposed to episodic. You look at the surgery, because if it's a situation where you have readmission due to complications, it will add up, but somehow it's not in the account books because you treat it as episodic. So we sort of address that, but more concerns from the audience would be, this is all great. How can I go around convincing, my bosses to do this? I know it's great, it's here, the technology is there. Yes, it's expensive, but you will pay by yourself. So how do we do that? So perhaps I could turn the question to Paul, as an experienced early adopter of innovative solutions. Could you share with the audience some helpful tips to help them kickstart their journey? Yeah.
Convincing the hospital or the healthcare institution to invest in this, it is always a challenge, like all things. No matter how affluent a society is, healthcare cost is always a concern, and that's the reality of life. It doesn't matter whether in Singapore or whether you are in the Philippines. But I think especially in places like Singapore, where we always have the idea that we want to be a pioneer, we want to be the adopter of new technology, we want to be the leader in the field, you really kind of at some stage need to get onto the system. Otherwise, you will just be a follower. And by being the early adopter, you also have some say of how to point the technology as it advances. You can contribute to your knowledge, you can help set the standard, and you can also be involved with the very early R&D and get access to those technologies faster. Whereas if you keep sitting on the wing and waiting for this to become more mature and waiting for it to become more mature, maybe it will happen, but you will lose out in the early phase where you are actually getting a lot more return in terms of your R&D, in terms of getting the earliest data and contributing to the literature in this field. And I think also in the talk about this halo effect, I think that genuine, especially in the private practice, in Mount Elizabeth Hospital, we have this, and you know what, in Thailand you don't. And these are some of the reality in life. It is a competition in the medical tourism. If Penang patients want to have it, well, you got nowhere to go, but eventually come to Singapore to have it done, unless you have it locally. So that's also a genuine situation.
Roger, you have obviously traveled across Asia Pacific in your role. Perhaps you would like to share some helpful tips to the audience as well?
I'll address more from the business side of things. I think Dr. Paul Long addressed very nicely on the clinical side of things. This is very well covered. It's about pioneering the technology, developing the technology, and actually getting ready for telerobotics. You won't be doing telerobotics if you can't do a case sitting inside the cath lab or outside in the console room, right? You may not be even allowed to do that if you don't have that relevant experience. And that early adopter experience is extremely necessary to get into telerobotics or remote robotics, right? So that said, what I wanted to tell you is that different countries, and thanks for bringing that up, we see different markets responding differently in terms of this investment angle. When we're talking about investment angle from the hospital side of things. We have countries where we know, and most countries in Asia Pacific are like that, excepting the more developed countries, let's say, Japan, Singapore, Australia, Korea. But most of the other countries, there is a significant gap to meet healthcare needs. So if you open up an angioplasty center tomorrow, I can tell you that it will be a money-making business. It doesn't matter whether you do robotics or non-robotics, right? So there is a market. There is not enough care being given. So when you bring in robotics inside your angioplasty business or coronary, artery disease business, what happens is you suddenly create a differentiator, right? People see that you are actually adopting the latest technology to give the latest safe treatment and efficacy treatment better than what others are able to give. So you see a whole flux of new patients coming to you. So if you're talking from the economics point of view, your patient volume goes up. You will be only doing a certain percentage of the total PCI volume on robotics, but your overall PCI volume will go up. You may even have to open another cath lab to actually address that volume. So that brings in additional revenue, right? So that cost that you're talking about, initial investment, right? It is actually paid off by the additional revenues that you will get in the next 3 to 5 years. And then there are other models, right, that we look at, because this is a business about not only a capital equipment, there is a consumable as well. So we work with hospitals, looking at their procedural volume, how much of that did they expect the robotic PCI to have, and what kind of structured payment we can kind of align with them. So we work with that. So if you are a clinician, if you see an utmost value in this technology, right, I'm quite sure that we can work things out to make it happen in your institution, because there are several models around that. Because this is not only a CAPEX model, as you rightly mentioned, Adam, it is also an OPEX model, right? So how do we balance the two so that if there is a budget constraint in terms of initial investment, how do we space it out over the lifetime of the next 4 or 5 years? And if there is no budget constraint, then you might as well take it off from day one. So we are very willing and flexible in terms of helping institutions adopt this technology. But the primary thing, as Dr. Paul Long said, you need to believe in that. Will you be that early adopter? And if you are, you're going to evangelize this technology and build this technology and be the first to implement this technology in your country, it can be made possible.
Thank you, Rajat. And Paul, it has been a great session to hear the same topic from different perspectives, from the clinical aspects. And Paul, you have clearly articulated some of the values that, it actually makes sense, if you ask me. So people who couldn't connect the dots previously, after seeing your presentation, I love it when you describe your female trainee who is now a consultant. That's a perfect example where it's a win-win situation for everyone, including providers. Because a lot of times when we talk about the triple aim, we talk about the patients. Everybody forget about providers. In fact, I've been complaining for a long time. We are humans too. Someone please take care of us. So great perspective from the clinical aspects. And Raja, definitely useful to hear from you. Some of the experiences you have, and from a commercial aspect, which sometimes stakeholders in the clinical environment will miss out because their primary focus is really for patient care. On my end, I still have a lot of questions that I received from the audience. Unfortunately, due to the lack of time, that's the problem, right? Even though Einstein say that time is relative, we seem to be always running out of time. But I really hope that we can continue this conversation, and I understand from Gabriel, the APAC Med, that there will be an opportunity for folks in the audience who are interested to continue this particular conversation if they're interested sometime in October. So perhaps Gabriel, over back to you, and you can share with us what are some of the more exciting events that's coming up.
Yep. Thank you very much, Dr. Chi, and also Dr. Paul Ong and Rajat for the interesting dialogue. We can clearly see how robotics can, simplify today's challenges, not just in everyday hospital life, but also in remote, surgery, benefiting both surgeons and patients. So as Adam mentioned, as a follow-up to this webinar, we also like to invite you to attend APAC Med's upcoming Asia Pacific MedTech Forum, scheduled for 19th to 20th of October. In fact, one of the key highlights of the forum is our 3D virtual showcase, which will feature two robotic hybrid operating rooms. All within the virtual 3D environment. You'll be able to navigate the virtual showcase easily with whatever devices that you are using. If you need more information, please feel free to reach out to me. So once again, I want to thank all of you for joining us. Appreciate the time that you spent with us this morning. So continue to stay healthy, stay safe, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you and see you soon. Bye-bye, everyone.
Cheers. Bye.
Cheers.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you very much. Bye.